Well, what's going on, gamers? It's just Crust here, and I'm back with another YouTube video. And today, we're going to be doing another Today I Learned. Um, I didn't upload over the weekend, obviously, just because just solely did not have class. Today is Monday, and I had two classes today, and another one which was recorded, which I did not particularly watch. And it's our normal subject for today. We have Civil War class, and then we are going to finish the day off with economics class. So I don't particularly think there's anything too in depth in either of these classes, so this might be a shorter episode. You can be thankful for that, or you don't have to. So let's just get right into it. So last week in Civil War, we really took a deeper dive and a deeper focus into two particular case studies of seceding states. Because after Abraham Lincoln's election, the South recognized that their days were basically numbered as far as they were concerned. Whether that is true or not is still, it's not particularly. It's still not particularly. Not, there's no finite answer, but it was probably going to be Dunzo. What is this? Um, but so on Wednesday, also excuse me, I am sick, so I'm kind of fighting through it basically. Um, on Wednesday, we discussed the two case studies of South Carolina and Georgia, who had very different approaches and methods and overall different bases that they had to get to. But overall, they yielded the same result, which was secession, and they were both deep South states. So today we shifted from like the secession winter view to a secession spring view, um, where the deep South states had already seceded, and this was the spring would be taking place after Lincoln's inauguration, which was its own thing. And today we spent the case study time looking at Virginia specifically, and how there's actually it's even more on the more further than Georgia was on differences from South Carolina, because as it was discussed, all Upper South states kind of had a different viewpoint than the Deep South. States like Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, like the very Upper South, um, had a different culture. They felt more akin to each other rather than feeling akin to South Carolina and Georgia and Florida and places like that. They felt like they didn't feel the requirement to go with South Carolina like say Mississippi and Georgia did. They felt more in the line of wait and see, like let's see what the states closer to us, the states socially closer and economically closer to us, the Upper South feel like doing. And Virginia was our obviously the most important power player in the Upper South, historically rich, as which is actually a key part of an argument, as well as just still very broadly powerful within antebellum America, or in this case, we're about to just get into bellum America. Uh, but basically, they called a secession convention in February of 1861, so roughly around when Lincoln was going to be inaugurated. And actually, the preliminary results were shocking relatively to what we'd already seen. This was the opposite way of where I was going. It was shocking compared to what we'd already seen. There was more like decided Unionists in Virginia than there were decided secessionists, like straight up. In the convention, there were roughly 50 people who were outspokenly, decidedly Unionist versus 30 people who were outspokenly, decidedly secessionist. But the caveat was that there were 70 people in the middle, 70 people who were announced undecided, and basically they were just swing. So, what was happening at the convention? Again, it seems as if the Unionists had a majority, and that Virginia, excuse me, Virginia shouldn't secede. or shouldn't have seceded. Again, I'm going to assume that you know at this point, spoiler alert, Virginia ends up seceding. But as we looked at in class, the vote was quite close. The vote was 88 to 55. How do we get to that point, though? So we kind of need to look at it from the sides of what both parties were arguing. By parties, both like the Unionist and the secessionist, the immediatists, etc., etc. What were they arguing? Both of them leaned on Virginia's history within America, formerly within the colonies, to make their arguments. The Unionist said that Virginia had been around since the beginning of the colonies. It was the mother of the nation. So, for that reason, Virginia should play a big role in keeping the states united and not doing anything specifically rash. On the other hand, secessionists said that since Virginia was the mother of all nations, or the mother of all states, it needed to take a bigger role in it because it took a big role in the revolution against England, and this is another revolution, and therefore Virginia needs to be at the forefront again. Other arguments for the Unionists included arguments such as slavery wouldn't survive, slavery was better off suited growing and proliferating within the Union rather than outside of the Union, um, and that a war, much opposed to what everybody, or what a lot of the Deep South believed, a war would not be easy for the North, or for the South. A lot of people within the South believed that the war would be quick and painless and that the South would come out easily on top. But more of the Upper South kind of recognized that that would definitely not be the case. Specifically, there's the example of famous Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was a convicted, had the conviction of a Unionist through and through during Secession Winter. In his letters, you would see him make the exact same arguments that Unionists were making at the Secession Convention. That the war would be too long, it would be a carnival of blood, with basically nobody winning and slavery losing. That was another thing, is that both sides recognized the sheer importance of slavery, and that they were debating on how to preserve slavery rather than if to preserve slavery, which was a key point that we had touched on. Meanwhile, the secessionists argued the opposite, basically. The secessionists argued that the South was much more prepared and just overall tougher and manlier, and by virtue, because, gendered thinking was very common, basically begging the Union for concessions, which was a big goal of the Unionists, was basically saying we can take advantage of our strength and we can take advantage of the people wanting union within the North to basically swing our way some compromises. The secessionists basically said, now we've crossed that Rubicon. It is unmanly to ask for any concessions. It is unmanly to keep trying to stay within the Union after all that has happened. And basically just refuted those points. And that was all and good, and that's when you started seeing a turn. There's definitely not a huge swing. I would say by March and beginning of April. I'm going to note beginning of April here. There were still more Unionists than secessionists. However, two specific instances, specific instance and the response happened. The Fort Sumter at Hack. There's a fort in South Carolina called Fort Sumter. It is a federal fort, and it still was being housed by federal troops even after South Carolina's secession. South Carolina demanded it be evacuated. The government said no. The government said no, and then eventually it culminated in mid-April. I think it was April 15th or something. South Carolina, Charleston, demanded that get evacuated. And our government said no. And actually sent resupplies to Fort Sumter. South Carolina had decided that it had enough and started bombing and attacking Fort Sumter. Basically, telling them, we're being serious, screw off. They ended up screwing off because after about 36 hours. What the? Let me concentrate. Huh? Okay, calm down, Jesus. I'm sorry, concentrating on not dying. Um, Basically, um, after about 36 hours, they screwed off. They said, you know what? You win. Um, we're done here. And they left Fort Sumter, leaving South Carolina and, in general, the seceded states, which are, I don't believe, the Confederacy yet, with a victory, presumably, or assumedly a victory. And that actually raised a lot of morale in Virginia, specifically in the capital of Richmond, where there were a lot of people with secessionist beliefs. And that, again, raised even more hope, saying and feeding into that belief of this is going to be an easy war. The North has no idea what they're up against. We are going to win instantly. That type. It fed into that rhetoric very easily. But then, that wasn't the nail in the coffin. The nail in the coffin to Virginians and to more upper South states, like I believe Kentucky and North Carolina, was Lincoln's response. Lincoln responded the next day, April 16th, by stating that he is going to be raising an army, and he requires every state to raise a standing army of around 75,000 troops. And what he could have done is just pulled those 75,000 troops, give or take, from just the free states and left the middle states, the slave-owning states that were still in the Union, to middle about. But he had required every single state to send troops, including Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. All those states are still on the fence about secession in general. And after Lincoln demanded that they send troops, Virginia's mind was made up. Virginia then, within the next couple of days, submitted their secession vote, 88 to 55, as well as North Carolina and Tennessee, capping off our secession seasons. Excuse me. And that's basically where we left off at that point, was just saying we have seen the evolution of the secession argument. We saw basically that conditional unionists, people that weren't looking to leave the Union unless it was the last resort, and people who were hardline secessionists weren't separated by much ideologically, because a lot of Confederate government actually was conditional secessionists in the beginning, or just a lot of figures in general, such as Vice President of the Confederacy, Alex Stevens. Stevens was, I believe, just conditionally secessionist. God damn it. I was having trouble moving things around in the inventory and hotbar. And also, Skeleton's accuracy is kind of fucking insane. Okay, that's just weird. Basically, Alex Stevens had been very conditional. He was saying, let's see how far we can push the Union. Let's see what we can do to, progress our slavery within the Union before leaving. By the end of the secession movement, he was vice president of the Confederacy, and he was one of the biggest advocates of secession from everybody, basically saying that the Union was doomed and that secession was the only way to survive. And so was Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was pretty on the secession train from the start. However, he was not a fire eater. as basically the South, in a rather smart observation by them, recognized that fire eaters were very good at riling the masses, but they weren't good at governing. Or they would not have been good candidates to govern, comparative to more tactful legislators. And that's also the transition with Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was a conditional unionist in the beginning, and then he easily, or by the end of it, as soon as Lincoln requested um, troops, he had converted. He was done. He basically decided to fight with the Confederates and became the general of Virginia's army in the Confederacy. Um, excuse me. God, my throat is awful. Our next class, the other class, is American Economic History. Um, we spent the beginning of this talking a lot about what we ended on last time, which was the Granger movement and what all of that was about. And basically, Granger movement, its first attempt at a movement was the Greenback movement, because the farmers were, in their eyes, getting screwed left and right, up and down, sideways, by everything that wasn't the farmer's fault, and basically anything that could be explained by by national means, they just didn't comprehend, really. Um, of course. We discussed in class basically their issues like foreclosure, interest rates, um, and losing profits could be easily explained relatively, such as the price was going down due to the price of wheat and other crops was going down due to an overflow in the market. And basically, the farmers' attempts at remedying this overflow into the market was to produce more and grow more crops, therefore increasing the prices, or increasing the supply again, decreasing the price again, and so on and so forth, to where I think it was by 1876 or like a year around there, prices had fallen 40% in the global market. However, the farmers didn't know that it had fallen globally. They just kind of assumed that it had only fallen in America and that everybody else was to blame except for them, which valid, I guess. What the hell, dude? Um, another, excuse me, another, well, actually, so that we discussed that in the beginning was basically we um, debunked all of the farmers' conspiracy theories, because in the end, from railroads to interest rates to prices on their crops in general, farmers thought it was conspiracy to make them poor, whether it be from bankers or the railroad tycoons like Vanderbilt, like bankers like J.P. Morgan. It ended, or they basically just assumed conspiracy and decided something needed to be done about it. So they started the Granger movement. Basically, the railroad part can be explained by long haul had more competition, and long haul, the more tonnage you have, the less price. So more freight equals less price ton per mile. Comparative to if you're doing a local haul, such as from one city to the next in a town, you probably won't be having that much freight, which means that it'll cost more relatively. That was a big thing that they didn't quite understand. And it was just stuff like that. Stuff that was not like completely intuitive, but like if you thought about it enough, it kind of made sense. Um, which led to the Greenback movement, because and that was all about inflationary politics, trying to get something else in the money flow to alleviate their debts, because they were making less money. Their prices were down further than manufacturing prices and such. Their incomes were decreasing while prices were not decreasing as fast. They had less money than other people and other sectors, such as the manufacturing sector. So their solution was inflationary politics, specifically within the Greenback movement. They wanted paper money. Paper money causes inflation naturally. Um, So they wanted a little bit of inflation to just get a little bit of relief because their mortgage rates and their debts, their interest rates, were 15 to 18%, some of the highest ever, or relatively at that time. It was ridiculous, and they they believed the only way they could get a break was by political economics, such as um, introducing paper money. I love some sirens. Um, and so, for example, they ran William Jennings Bryan 3 times on that type of um, monetizing silver platform. Because silver was demonetized in 1876, I think. And it was called the crime of 1876 because it took an entire precious metal relatively out of the market, out of the money supply. The gold standard was dependent on the supply and flow of gold, and gold only. So if gold supply stagnated, the money supply stagnated as a whole. And we have like MV equals PT or something, like money times the velocity equals price times something else. Basically, transactions were going up. Globalization was making the transactions go way, way up. The money supply, however, was not increasing at all, and neither was the velocity. Say the velocity was staying, basically, sales were going up at a faster rate, and the equation needed to be balanced. That is not an equation, actually, it is an identity. The identity must stay the same. So what happened was prices fell everywhere. And that's a reasonable explanation, is that there was no new gold in the money supply, and everybody was running off the gold standard at the time. So people in the Granger movement specifically wanted silver. They wanted the silver back. They wanted more money in the system to ease to ease everybody's worries monetarily. Did they ever get that? No. And actually, by around the second and third time that William Jennings Bryan ran, because he ran completely on a platform of remonetizing silver, by the time that he ran again, it had relatively been fixed. The issue relatively fixed itself. Like by 1876, prices were down 40% globally. However, by 1808, which is the last time he ran and the last time he lost to William Howard Taft, prices globally were up 47%. Meaning that, truth be told, the farmers were in a better spot than they were 30 years ago when they were complaining. They just didn't see it like that, and they still believed that silver was the best. And the question that we and many other people in my class in the lecture asked was, well, why? Why did the money supply, or why, spoilers, why did prices go up even though nothing else had changed? And if anything, globalization was going on even more, so there was more transactions. Well, the money supply increased. The 60s and 70s was a very stagnant time in gold. Gold hadn't increased in a while. There was the gold rush of the the California gold rush, which gave a big boost to gold, but that wasn't forever. That didn't last forever. And I'll take you through the timeline that my class went, because our next guess after California was Alaska. Alaska was after this. Alaska was in like early 1900s. Yukon Gold was later. So what caused it? Apparently, I didn't know this, which I guess that's kind of the point. Was gold in South Africa was discovered. And 1876, coincidentally, roughly, when the crime of 1876 was happening, that was the lowest point. As the market finally started recovering, due to gold found in, I don't remember the exact place or the exact name. Damn, I don't remember the name. But gold was found in southern Africa. We talked about that. Now we discussed railroads too, and how railroads overtook canals, and how the assumption is basically that there would be no America without railroads. However, there was one economist. This is how we kind of end the class. It was kind of on a cliffhanger, you know. Um, One economist, basically Robert or Roger, one of them, one of Bob Fogel, I think, or an economist with a last name Fogel, um, basically analyzed it, and we left it on the cliffhanger because we're probably going to investigate it all on Wednesday. Um, of He believes that railroads were quite dispensable, and that America would relatively be okay without it. And that's where we left off. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't see how, because railroads are so big. I mean, especially like right now, railroads are we are learning about how railroads are incredibly useful. To what did I what where did the crafting table go? Um. Okay. What? Oh, whoops. All right, that one was on me. But I don't particularly understand how that assessment could be made, specifically from the aspect of there's so much growth that happened solely because of railroads. Like as we talked about, freaking the wheat industry boomed due in part or due to, in a large part because of the railroad growth and the railroad industry growth and how prices fell in the railroad industry, decreasing intercontinental or continental travel. Um, I don't particularly understand how that could be done without it, solely because canals weren't doing it. Canals, we discussed also the kind of lack of an appearance of canals and how well practically what is I'm trying to organize an inventory, how practically canals weren't practical, um, how they were like less efficient due to just the mileage, and a bunch of other things. Like railroads were more capitally intensive, but they just railroads were just the more popular way to go when you're dealing with more valuable cargo and people. Um, and I just don't see canals having as big of an impact on American economics as freaking as railroads did. But that's an interesting debate that apparently we'll get into next class. All right, well, I think that'll just about do it for this episode. It was a little bit all over the place, but I had fun. I learned a lot today, as I did with every, or as I do with every day. I learn a lot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go write an 8-page term paper due on Wednesday, and I have not started at all. So I'll see y'all later. Thank you so much for watching.